Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. Good to have you back on the show. How are you?
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Good morning to you. Good morning to you, Ayo. It's always a pleasure. After a week, I've missed you both terribly. Hope you're both doing well. Well, let me tell you about what is happening around the world. Donald Trump took to the stage in what many have been calling a campaign closing rally in his hometown of New York City. Now, his rally was at the iconic Madison Square Gardens, and it was, as you can imagine, quite a spectacle. Lots of people in the crowd. And one of the faces that we haven't seen a lot of during the course of this campaign is that of Melania Trump. She actually introduced her husband, brought him out on stage. The pair did embrace, gave each other a few somewhat awkward kisses on the cheek, but it was good to see the former First Lady on stage introducing her husband. And then when you look at the speech itself, it was a typical Donald Trump speech. He spoke for about an hour, 15 minutes, and of course talked about his rival, Kamala Harris, talked about Joe Biden, but also he talked about his own ideas for immigration, but also specifically about the economy. He actually revealed that he is proposing a new policy that would see tax credits for in-home family caregivers. And if you remember, when Kamala Harris was on The View, she also talked about expanding Medicare in this way to include in-home family caregivers. So clearly, this is something that both candidates are speaking about. Both candidates seem to be taking this type of important step in terms of addressing health concern and financial concerns of Americans. Now, going back to Donald Trump, again, he did speak about a range of other issues. We've put together a small montage of his highlights. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
This will be America's new golden age. It's going to happen quickly, too, very quickly. Every problem facing us can be solved, but now the fate of our nation is in your hands. Next Tuesday, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've done a terrible job, that crooked Joe Biden has done a terrible job. You've destroyed our country. We're not going to take it anymore. Kamala, you're fired. Get out. Get out. You're fired. This will be America's new
very animated language there. Very animated language there from the former president. He did, of course, include his iconic slogan, "You're fired," a nod to, of course, The Apprentice when he was at the helm of the show. But again, it is an election that is still very close, too close to call. And that's why you see many people taking a very close look at both candidates and their policies, looking at Donald Trump and his ideas for the economy. You have had many US-based economists debunk what his ideas are and say that perhaps his ideas shouldn't be believed because there is a risk that those ideas, if implemented, could tank the US economy. And these people do believe that the economic ideas that have been laid out by the Harris-Walz campaign are more likely to be more protective for the US economy. But again, a lot of discussion happening there. Now, if we take a step over to Kamala Harris, she also had a very busy campaign weekend, which actually kicked off in Houston on Friday into Saturday. And Houston, of course, is the hometown of Beyonce Knowles Carter and, of course, Kelly Rowland. Both women are iconic musicians. They, of course, were together in Destiny's Child and have both had very successful solo careers. And so they came out on stage in Houston to introduce Kamala Harris. And they both said, especially Beyonce said, that though they are celebrities, they are not speaking at this political campaign, at this rally as celebrities, rather they're speaking as mothers. And what's very interesting is that in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, was speaking and campaigning for Kamala Harris, she gave and delivered one of the most powerful, the most poignant speeches I've heard her give during this election cycle, when she talks about what it will mean if the United States continues to peel back feminine and women's healthcare in the country, what it will mean for Americans. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Your girlfriend could be the one in legal jeopardy if she needs a pill from out of state or overseas, or if she has to travel across state lines because the local clinic closed up. Your wife or mother could be the ones at higher risk of dying from undiagnosed cervical cancer because they have no access to regular gynecological care. Your daughter could be the one too terrified to call the doctor if she's bleeding during an unexpected pregnancy. Your niece could be the one miscarrying in her bathtub after the hospital turned her away. And this will not just affect women, it will affect you and your sons. The devastating consequences of teen pregnancy won't just be borne by young girls, but also by the young men who are the fathers.
Thank you. So those were very, very powerful words from the former First Lady Michelle Obama. Definitely, she has a lot of political weight in this game, and whomever she throws her weight behind, of course, this case, it is Kamala Harris, it is definitely an asset. And so very, very important to hear what she had to say when it comes to women's reproductive health. Now, let's move on to the Middle East. And Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has revealed a proposal for a ceasefire in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. This proposal sets out a two-day ceasefire which would see the release of four Israeli hostages from Gaza back into Israel. Now, as it stands now, neither side, neither Hamas nor Israel have spoken about whether or not they're going to take this proposal seriously, whether or not they're going to implement it, because they both have very, very hard lines that they want to see happen before further discussions for a ceasefire can happen. For Hamas, for example, they want every Israeli troop out of Gaza before they can facilitate or even discuss or shed any type of appetite for a ceasefire. And similarly too, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, says that there's no appetite for a ceasefire until he is able to destroy Hamas. So very, very hard lines from both sides. It's unclear now if Egypt, if Qatar, if any GCC country can put its own diplomatic powers together to bring some sort of peace in the Middle East. But it does seem as though both sides are hard on their positions. And then if we come out of the Middle East and look towards the Commonwealth leaders had been meeting over the weekend in Samoa, and you had many of them discuss and actually sign a document looking at reparations relating to the slave trade. What is interesting here, though, is that even though more than 30 Commonwealth ministers and leaders signed this document, including the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said that there is absolutely no discussion with this discussion on reparations that includes the United Kingdom paying any monies to anybody relating to reparations for slavery and the slave trade. Now, this is disheartening, you can imagine, to many people who've been anticipating some type of respite, some type of development. If we can understand as a people that the slave trade and the slavery that the UK actively participated in is wrong, then reparations should be a conversation that is going to be taken seriously, so that should actually turn into some sort of image or tangible outcome. But as it stands now, the United Kingdom says that in terms of money, that's just not something that's going to happen. But also understand that reparations don't only include money, it could be a moral situation. And we also know that at the helm of the Commonwealth is now a Ghanaian woman, an African woman. So it would again also be interesting to see if Mrs. Botchway, who has replaced Patricia Scotland at the helm of the Commonwealth, to use her influence, use her position to perhaps push this idea for more appetite towards a slave trade reparation system. It would be interesting, and I'm sure that many people across the African continent, across the world, would like to see something like that. And before I come to you both for comments, let us also touch on the fact that it's election season in Japan. Now, we do know that its conservative ruling party, the LDP, which is led by the incumbent Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, failed to secure a majority. It's something that they were vehemently fighting to try and achieve, and unfortunately they were unable to do so in the lower houses of parliament in these elections. But it's also important to note that this loss for the ruling parties continues to complicate an already shaky position the Prime Minister is in. So it will be, again, my friends, very interesting to hear what you have to say about all of these different world stories before we go on to the newspapers. It's 8 days to the U.S. elections, actually. It's next week, Tuesday, so 1 week and 1 day shy to the elections. Yes, 8 days to the elections. And of course, with that, the two main candidates are pulling out all the stops to ensure that they're able to mop up those votes as many, especially the swing states, as possible. From Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, just speaking, and they went to Houston as well. So just being able to get those votes. Already 41 million Americans have voted ahead of the elections, either by mail ballot or, by voting by ballots. But next week, Tuesday, comes to the wire. One of the things I would say is that, as they come to the end of their campaign season, both candidates have centered on the main campaign, the thrust of their campaign. For Donald Trump, it's Make America Great Again, and of course on migration. He has said that if elected president, he's still going to institute the biggest deportation, known, in American, at least in modern American records. And for Kamala Harris, she continues to hammer on reproductive rights, especially in areas where they have been both popular in. It's also notable that during the campaigns, Kamala tempered on some of the language she's used on Donald Trump. For instance, remember last week, she had said he was fascist. And according to some pro-Harris camps, they had said that's not in line with her, it's not connecting with her voters, and that's not her style. So she went back to being a bit more moderate and focusing on the issues whilst avoiding calling names and just attacking the person of Donald Trump. But again, like you said, this is perhaps one of the elections where until the results are announced, we won't be able to tell. With regards to reparations, let me just say one thing on that. It's not new. Israel and Germany agreed on reparations in September of 1952, which was effected in March of 1953. Germany paid Israel $714 million over a number of years, and that led to the development of Israel as we see today. And so it's just to say that beyond apologies, what these nations are saying is that the impact of colonialism, the impact of slavery is still being felt by some of these countries today, and that they owe it as a duty to pay some money.
Right. Okay, I'll run through these stories quickly. 3 stories, I guess, on the table. I already commented on Japan earlier on this program this morning. Now, the Commonwealth Conference in the South Pacific island of Samoa, the first time, the island will host this conference. 2 issues were on the table. Climate change, with the Pacific Island states, former colonies, 56 Commonwealth countries in all, saying that, look, they are under the threat of, climate change, water level rising. All these countries being signatories to the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord, as it is otherwise known. But the bigger contentious issue was about reparation. Now, Britain vetoed that reparation clause that will have been in the communique and replaced it with what they called reparatory justice. The King Charles III, who is the head of the Commonwealth, said, look, he is looking forward into the future, that members have the right to determine their own future, but it is better to talk about that future. A week earlier, he had been, insulted by Linda Thorpe, an independent Samoan indigenous Australian in the House of Parliament in Canberra, who was telling him, you are not my king. And that's the kind of sentiment that you find, when these Pacific countries, CARICOM, they are called, the Caribbean countries, and the African Union say, we want reparations. It's curious, however, that, Keir Starmer says, well, we're not talking about reparations. We know the past. Let's look into the future. And what's her name? Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, who is going to give us a budget on October 30, on Thursday, is also saying Britain has no money to pay. They are more concerned about filling a dark hole of about $22 billion. But in any case, it looks like the conversation will still come up, with these 56 members of the Commonwealth talking about reparations. Ironically, Britain provided reparation in 1833 after the decision was taken to abolish the slave trade that existed between the 15th century and the 19th century. As for Egypt calling for ceasefire, well, Egypt will not be the first country to do so. But Sisi, this is the first time he's asking for that ceasefire, 2 days. But Israel, as you know, has been very recalcitrant. Over the weekend, it had a retaliatory attack against Iran, trying to destroy some of the defense systems of Iran. Now, before now, France and the United States had asked for 21 days ceasefire, which Israel again rejected. Neither Israel nor any of the other parties, has responded. As for the 8-day last pitch for the American presidency, well, Trump campaigned in New York, his own city. It was a very vile, abusive thing, targeting Puerto Rico, targeting migrants. David West, a Republican, calling Kamala Harris the Antichrist, and Trump himself threatening those he defines as enemies within, and Tucker Carlson, former Fox News presenter, saying, oh, look, I support Trump, I don't support Harris, she's not good enough. But Harris was in Houston, Texas. And at Houston, Texas, yes, you talked about Michelle Obama. But more important is the support from Beyonce and from her mother, Tina Knowles, and also from her friend, Kelly Rowland. And there, they made reproductive rights the big issue, with Beyonce saying, I'm not here as a celebrity, I'm here as a mother. And freedom is what I preach. Abortion rights, reproductive rights. And in any case, I sung Freedom, 2016-2019, from the album Lemonade, is the major theme for Kamala Harris. So this was girls' power, but, Mrs. Carter's influence was well fed at that. But we have 8 days to go. We'll see. It's neck to neck, and we'll see what will happen, on November 5. We don't have a dog in the fight, as it were, but we have an interest in seeing how America turns out for the world from November 5 going forward.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you very much for your analysis, both to you, Dr. Rubin, and of course to you, Ayo. Let's move on to the newspapers now and take a look at the front page of This Day. The front page of This Day newspaper leads with news that philanthropist and businessman Femi Otedola has donated another 3.7 billion naira to Augustine University, where he's also a chancellor. The monies are reportedly for constructing the second phase of the university's engineering building. And also on the front page of This Day, its picture headline has a gorgeous family photo from Airpeace's 10-year anniversary, where many Arise familiar faces were in attendance, and of course our very own Ayo Myro Esse was the beautiful host for the night. Now moving on to the New Telegraph now, and the New Telegraph reports on transport costs. It talks about how Nigerians are calling on the federal government to intervene as domestic airfares continue to skyrocket, and this is as the Christmas season approaches. Airfares to many destinations, especially to the southeast and south regions of Nigeria, will witness huge traffic, as they usually do around that time of the year. But sadly, airfares could be as high as 400,000 naira, between 400 and 500,000 naira for a one-way economy ticket. Exorbitant prices there, and that's why it's on the front page of the New Telegraph. And then moving on to the Daily Independent now. The Daily Independent leads with experts giving the federal government a list of recommendations, including the implementation of investment-friendly reforms in the oil and gas sector to support production, ramp up and attract the much-needed investment that would help optimize the sector's potential. Now, all of this follows on from the recently concluded International Monetary Fund's downward review at the spring meetings that took place in DC just last week. But off the back of that, they had, of course, downward reviewed the growth outlook for Nigeria, saying that it's unfounded, and that it's not unfounded, and that these experts say that the risk factors identified in the sectors remain essentially they are going to continue keeping the economy down. Now, if we move on to the Vanguard, still on the Nigerian economy, and the Vanguard is reporting on the pressure mounting on the Naira as it falls to 1,740 Naira against the dollar. Now, this is on the parallel markets, and the dealers there say that they see a further depreciation coming. The picture headline story on the Vanguard, though, does have three Nigerian heavy hitters. You've got Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. You've also got the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, and of course the one and only Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Moving on to The Guardian now. And one of the stories on The Guardian's front page takes a look at the debilitating disorders Nigerians are experiencing in reference to COVID. Now, they go into a bit more detail if you read the article, but specifically the conditions that they're reporting on are to do with the brain, what they're calling neurological long COVID, and effects of that we are seeing, according to this article, is mild cognitive impairments, brain fog, as well as people suffering from pins and needles, amongst other issues. And then the Daily Trust, if you take a look at the front page of the Daily Trust, it's reporting on hardship getting harder. And this is as regions in the north enter their 8th day without electricity. And this has, of course, had a knock-on effect on hospitals, on laboratories, of course, on food freezers too. And their picture story has empty petrol stations, some in Abuja, as citizens abandon vehicles because the price of petrol is just too high. Then also, the national economy leads with skepticism. Skepticism that Nigerians are feeling about how safe the use of compressed natural gas is. Of course, we've been talking about the positive aspects of this, but this is what the national economy is reporting. And this is, of course, in the aftermath of the removal of fuel subsidies, especially as a result of recent explosions. That's why people are expressing some type of concern with them. Moving on to African papers now. And the Daily Nation of Kenya reports on presidential hypocrisy. Now, if you remember, at the beginning of the year, President William Ruto said that he would create a state capture commission in order to end the culture of government contracts going to public officials and to the political elite, or people who are affiliated with the politicians. And he said that he was going to make sure that state capture ceases to be an issue. But as this front page shows, 8 Kwanzaa flagship projects have a conflict of interest associated with them, many of which affect President Ruto's family directly. So very ironic there. And then moving on to UK and US papers, we'll look at the Daily Mail from the UK, and it leads with news that the 55-year-old Labour MP Mark Amesbury has been suspended from the party after video footage emerged of him punching a man to the ground in the early hours of Saturday morning in his Cheshire constituency. And finally, if we take a look at Sundays, this was from yesterday, but if we take a look at the New York Times opinion front page, it looks at it's a very, very powerful but simple headline, and the front cover is quoting, not so much quoting, but rather speaking in reference to the US Republican nominee. And the front page says, Donald Trump says he will prosecute his enemies, order mass deportations, use soldiers against citizens, abandon allies, and play politics with disasters. Believe him. So it doesn't take a genius to see whose side the New York Times is on in this presidential election. But those are the papers. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Adefemi. But something caught my eye there. Our Turn to Eat. I think that's the front page of The Nation from Kenya. There's a book titled It's Our Turn to Eat by Michelle Arong, in which, she wrote about John Kitongo, Kenya whistleblower and corruption in Kenya. It will be interesting to understand what it is that it is our turn to eat. A popular phrase in connection with Kenya. But thank you very much for joining us on the morning show.